Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to House of Footy. It's your boy Ray, and with me, I've got a full house tonight. Welcome tonight, Mac
Good evening.
and Gio.
What is good, guys?
The last round of Champions League group stage games finished today, and boy, do we have some interesting results. We'll cover this, plus we'll preview some of the Premier League games coming up this weekend. But before we get into it, don't forget to follow us on our social medias, both on X and Instagram. Our handle is at House of Footy. Also, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to us. We are on both Spotify and YouTube. And lastly, feel free to get in touch with us via email. We love hearing from you guys, and we want you guys getting involved. Our email is houseoffooty@hotmail.com. Well, where else to start with other than Group F, Mac, which was the group of death? We're all keeping tabs on this game. The people will argue the more interesting one out of the two. Newcastle hosting AC Milan. Newcastle. This was essentially a must-win for both teams to keep their European hopes alive. Started very, very quickly. Chances in both ends, and ultimately Newcastle didn't get that result that they wanted. But walk us through your thoughts from this game, Mac.
First, I want to take a step back, not just about this game from this group. These couple of games, this group stage is kind of why we all love this group individually is why we all love the Champions League and is the best part of it, in my opinion. That this is not just football. This group was cinema. It was absolute class. How the teams played, the intensity, the ups and downs, the twists, the turns, where you thought one team was going through it, then another team's not going through. One team's knocked out of Europe completely. There were so many changing different scenarios going through this game of football that it was kind of keeping on the edge of your seat. And realistically, to be completely honest, I know we'll talk about maybe one other team or two teams later in the podcast. The only interesting part really of the sixth group stage game, anything that really you can take out of it, in my opinion. But to go back to the individual game for Newcastle AC Milan, I think this is a game of missed chances from Newcastle. The first half, and I would argue almost all this game, they absolutely dominated AC Milan. They should have gone the score sheet much earlier. Many players each had their own chances where Almiron missed a tap in, great tackle by Tomori. Isak missed their own chance. Callum Wilson missed his own chance. There was a lot of players, and even Mike Maignan made a cameo to make some nice saves. The one that screams out to me is the Bruno Guimaraes save. But those opportunities left begging put Newcastle in a position where in football, a goal changes a game. And when Pulisic equalized for Newcastle in the just before the 60th minute, it started to open things wide up. And now you can potentially see Milan were in the game, had opportunities, and were starting to kind of edge a little bit closer to making a competitive match. And as the further that Newcastle pressed to be able to get the winner, because they know they needed it, AC Milan had them on the counter. So I think this game should be a learning lesson for a lot of these Newcastle players. It's a lot of their players' first time in the Champions League. I think only, if I recall correctly, the most experienced player for Champions League on their entire team is Sandro Tonali, and he probably bet in the game, so that's why he wasn't playing. So it's going to have to be a learning experience for them because they're young, they're up and coming. They have to recalibrate because just in different games, different results didn't go their way. Maybe because referee decision, maybe because in this game they weren't clinical enough. But you can see the quality, you can see the intensity that they have, that you do give them a lot of credit for how they kind of participated in this Champions League season. But close isn't close enough when you're playing against the best of the best and the best clubs in the world.
Close is definitely not close enough because even though they got the goal that they needed through Joe Linton, which was a banger, by the way, yeah, like you said, there were some missed chances, and it felt like if you don't put those chances away, it's going to come back, and especially with the tired legs that Newcastle had out there. I think we all knew or had a feeling that AC Milan, if they didn't get a 2-goal deficit heading into the second half, there was a chance. And Gio, of course, they took their chance with maybe some unlikely players, but of course, they did get the win. So, what were your thoughts on that?
I think Milan played it, exactly how they would have, like maybe a bit more possession, maybe a couple more chances here and there, but they converted on their chances. They didn't get many chances. I think going into the 80th, 90th minute, they had five total shots and one shot on target, which was their goal. So they didn't get many chances. They had about like 44% 44% of the ball, which isn't much, what isn't horrible at all. So Like I was telling Mac earlier, I thought Newcastle's defending on AC Milan's first goal was horrid. A, l- a lot of standing around, a lot of deflections, and I get it. Sometimes it's kind of hard to read, but you know the way in which they were standing around, leaving Christian Pulisic open for for that long, in that position is always never going to be in your favor. And I get it. The second goal, is very well is deserving of a draw. But obviously, them knowing the position they are in, you kind of have to go for it. They were going for it again, not clinical enough. Like Max said, on any given, on any other given day, could have gone their way. Absolutely, if they had a full healthy squad, I think this very well could have gone their way because there would have been some you know better finishing up front possibly that they could have subbed on. Key ones being such as Callum Wilson. Just the entirety of the team wasn't completely there. They lost in the end. I don't think it mattered that they lost because AC Milan and themselves are both out. But they did what they had to do. I think they again first year back in the Champions League. I think they had a decent run. Yes, they were in a tough group, but yes, they also proved to the masses that they can very much so hang with the best of Europe.
Yeah, wanted to mention, of course, as well. You talked about some of the substitutions. I think Callum Wilson, Alex Isak came on. I actually didn't watch the game. Mac, I didn't catch. Anthony Gordon was taken off. I'm not sure if that was through injury or just through tiredness, but that really screams the fact that you're probably their best player this season had to go off before the game finished in a must-win scenario. That just shows you how much help they need. And having Dan Burn come on, he's of course a decent Premier League player, but not your number one option. And then just the image of him falling down as that long ball by Lascelles is played very last minute right in front of Joe Linton just sums it up for Newcastle, who, as you mentioned, Gio, because they lost this game, they actually at for 4 minutes in the second half they were actually going through to the knockout stages, but with that result being said, they're out of Europe. And so, Mac, just quick question for you. Now that Newcastle, and we all know that Newcastle are no longer in Champions League or Europa League, what are your takes from them this season? Where do they go from here?
You have to invest. If you just look at this, I think this is one of the simplest ways to be able to look at how this team's structured right now. Just look at the substitutions that are available for each team. Newcastle had 4 fewer available registered than AC Milan. That just shows that this team does lack a lot of depth. I understand they're riddled with injuries, suspensions, etc., but they need more bodies. They need more Premier League, Champions League level players if they're going to become more of a threat in this type of competition, even to get out of the group stage. This is not too dissimilar to, if you recall correctly, back in the day when Manchester City first entered Champions League football. It didn't hit, even though they played well in the Premier League, they didn't kind of hit the ground running in the Champions League. In fact, I think, so I saw an interesting stat where there's only been 3 times in Champions League history where an English team finished fourth in the table prior to this year. And it actually happened to 2 different teams in this Champions League rotation, of course, with Manchester United and Newcastle. One of the previous times before, and the most recent time before this, was Manchester City, I think, in their first season in the Champions League, or one of their first seasons. So it's an adjustment period. This team definitely needs to be invested in. I believe in a lot of these individual players, like Anthony Gordon, I think is a phenomenal player. Bruno Guimaraes is a phenomenal player. Kieran Trippier is a leader. Even Livramento, who is, at the beginning of the season, he was a substitute, but I think he's pure quality. So they have a lot of really good players. They just need more of them. And again, get this experience, get these notches on the belt. I don't find it too dissimilar. And I know we all 3 of us love basketball, but it's not too dissimilar to that young and up and coming team that first makes the playoffs. They're going to get roasted in the first or second round, but as long as they have a good fight, they're going to get that experience. You have to lose before you can win, and then they'll be able to come back better. However, I do want to hammer this AC Milan team because for me, it was the second most ineffectual performance, even though they won. And that's good for them. ineffectual performance. They were like there was no effort. They were lethargic, and like I think one of the key players to look at that and is very emblematic of their season for him so far is Rafael Leao. He had two clear opportunities to one get them the lead in the first half, which again, if they won this game and had a couple more goals early on, they could have potentially separated themselves and got if they were able to find a way to be able to hammer Newcastle on goal difference to potentially surpass PSG. But they didn't. They weren't in the game. They were looking to be able to play on the counter. And then in the second half, on a breakaway, strikes the post. If he's not there providing goals and assists, he shouldn't be on the pitch. There's nothing, he offers nothing else. So a lot of these players, and even the goal they did score, I agree with Gio, poor defending from Newcastle. But there's literally 4 slices of luck for Newcastle for Pulisic to be able to latch onto that. Giroud was looking to shoot that at the exact same time, and it was deflected off a couple of players as well. They're very, very fortunate. They got the win. Sometimes it happens in football, but for me, I disagree, and I want to hammer their intention going into this game because they may have won it, but I would argue they did not deserve anything, really.
Okay, that's very fair, and we'll definitely talk a little bit more about those teams that qualified. But let's move on to another team in this group. Mac mentioned Newcastle's inexperience, but there is an experienced team here. You could argue, even with a lot of young players, this Dortmund team did get a tie against PSG, securing that top spot in that group, Gio. And honestly, a result that benefited both teams in the end. Of course, Dortmund took the lead, and then PSG were able to claw a goal back, ending in both teams qualifying through to the knockout stages. But what are your overall takes in for this game, Gio?
Dortmund simply they could have very well lost this game and still could have ended well for them. But they kept it competitive, which was um, grand scheme of thing. Yes, it's great for Dortmund, but in the grand scheme of thing, I think PSG fans need to be worried because this is not really the full Dortmund either. So if you're struggling and you're not clinical enough to say take advantage of not the full Dortmund squad that you typically get in a more competitive setting. Say it was a knockout game and they had played their full squad. Would it even be this close? So I think more so as well as Dortmund played throughout the game, as poorly as PSG's finishing was, their creativity was really only through the left side through Mbappe, and there were obviously runners down the middle, but teams know this already. Teams know that that's the formula, and they're gonna clog Mbappe's lanes. They're gonna stack that side, and make sure balls don't get through to the middle. One fortunately did get through, and Emery did put that away. But apart from those chances, all the other chances weren't great to begin with. So I think yes, they're fortunate to move on, and but I think they have a lot to be concerned about in terms of how they're gonna face teams going to the knockout round, which the competition only gets tougher. But you do have to give sorry Dortmund a lot of credit because they're coming out here and they are um, putting in convincing performance. Although, albeit a draw, a very convincing performance that their full squad wasn't even in.
Yeah. Regarding the way to defend PSG, I was a little bit surprised at how offensive Dortmund started this game. Actually, the lineups essentially was of course four. It looked like a 4-1-4-1 because the two midfielders above the six were Brandt and Royce, who you don't really classify them as center midfielders. You kind of classify them as cams, and they weren't really going to be doing a lot of tracking back, which a lot of chances from PSG came from exactly that, winning it high off the pitch, and then just springing that ball in behind, which with two, let's just put it nicely, not so quick defenders in Hummels and Sule, not the greatest way to defend Mbappe and the likes of those PSG attackers. But big credit to Sule. I'm sure you guys have seen the probably one of the best goal line clearances of all time, if I may be so bold to say, on that Mbappe chance. Mac, what were your thoughts on the game overall?
One great call on the Soleil block. The fact that it was Mbappe hit it into the ground, it was going up in the air, and for him to still get a touch on it, that's class. That's like for me. Do you know? I always calls back whenever there's a clearance like this. Remember the Marquinhos celebrating his block like it was a goal. I think it was for PSG a couple years ago in the Champions League. It just go. That's what I always go back to now whenever there's a moment like this. So that's definitely Sule's Marquinhos moment. And funny, he's playing against Marquinhos to be able to have that moment. I think this game. Interesting overall, if we're kind of split it up, I do agree with Ray. I think Dortmund, how aggressive they were, how on the front they were, it confused me a little bit. I loved it. Like, as a neutral, exciting, fun, crazy. But if Dortmund lost this game, they finished second in the group. So what are you doing? Like at the end of the game, where it was Dortmund, I think Dortmund at points had the ball, and they were still trying to play to kind of go out and press and try to be able to create opportunities. Like what? Thank you. I appreciate this. But if I'm their coach, I'm furious. I'm infuriated. Again, like I think Terzic, I think that's how you say his name. The Croatian with the it's not that you'll lose me. But overall, I think that you got to be a little bit concerned on that end because they're going to be so helter-skelter. They're going to be so have too many highs and lows in their play considering how all the defensive they are. And if we were to compare and contrast them to a Premier League team, I very much look at them at like Brighton. When all things go well, they can play smooth, beautiful football. But if it's built on sand and they're making mistakes like they can do, it's going to look very bad very, very quickly. So I think still a lot of fun. I think either team could have come out with a win and been in a good. It wouldn't have been. Both teams walk away feel like they could have won the game. I think the main takeaway from PSG, for me, if you were to ask, is I really don't want to see Mbappe playing in this striker role as much, especially for PSG. I understand you're looking at players like Kolo Muani or Lee. I know Dembele was out for this game, but when he plays centrally, it just seems like it's so easy for him to get triple and quadruple team where you kind of feel like he's missing the space that he needs. I want to be able to play out wide for PSG. I understand they don't have that center forward yet. But who knows? Maybe if he goes to a different team, maybe they already have somebody there that can, he can play off of. But again, for this team, it just seems like there is that other level they could have go to, but they just don't have the right tools in the toolbox to do so. So even though it's great that they've got out of the group stage, finished second, I'm not looking favorably to them to be able to carry on in the tournament. I think both these teams, to be honest, if you're asking right now, I think Dortmund, if they get even a somewhat difficult matchup, I wouldn't be surprised to get knocked out, and I'd be surprised if PSG facing any of the other first place teams make it through. So exciting group, but I think at the end of the day, it's going to be pretty ineffectual.
That is perfect because it leads me to my next question. Just before I do that, just want to mention both scores for this game were 21-year-old Adeyemi and 17-year-old Zaire Emery. If we thought life after Messi and Ronaldo was no longer, we have two young players that we can look at in the future. But of course, moving on to the 16 teams that actually did qualify, Gio, just going to read them out. Man City, RB Leipzig, Bayern Munich, Real Madrid, Real Sociedad, Inter Milan, Barcelona, Borussia Dortmund, Atletico Madrid, Lazio, Arsenal, PSV, FC Copenhagen, Napoli, PSG, and Porto. Does it look more, or does it feel more open this year than it was last year, or am I looking at it too intensely? Are there any favorites that stand out to you from this list, Gio? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think you still have to keep Bayern in those conversations. You still have to keep Man City. Albeit the injuries, teams are hoping. De Bruyne's injury, takes longer because if they're gonna have to play him, you don't want to give him that time to get fit and to get game ready because once he does come back, he is that difference maker for them. He will be that difference maker, and now that Holland's struggling with a foot injury, teams are almost lining up to play them now. If it were up to them, they'd have to draw tomorrow and play next week because they want to take advantage of that. Because if you give them time, once those players get healthy, once they get in rhythm, would be a lot more scary to play. So Bayern, Man City, can't really discount Real Madrid for all they have done in this competition, but my dark horse and who I've been preaching for is although they are young, although they don't have that superstardom is Dortmund. They've kind of not cemented themselves, but they've kind of put themselves on the radar. And I know teams are looking at them saying, ideally in a round of 16, we don't want to face them either. The depth, the energy that the young core brings, it's really difficult to play against. So because sometimes it almost seems like they don't have a game plan and they're just going out there and playing and having fun. That's even harder to defend. So I think overall, those four teams that I listed are definitely three some of the favorites, and then one Dortmund being a dark horse team to look at.
That screams Monaco a couple years back when they just went on that fairy tale run. So
Yep.
hey, very well could be. Before I toss it to you, Mac, to end off this section, and of course when you talk about Arsenal, I'm gonna just mention our my dark horse teams. I do agree with Gio. Of course, your Man Cities, your Bayerns, even Real Madrid. You can't really count them out. Two teams, Inter Milan and Atletico Madrid. I feel like it's in the competition that is it's proven time and time again. It's more so about how you play the game and how you sort of think the game. You don't have to kind of be pragmatic. Atletico Madrid and Inter Milan, those are the teams that are gonna slow down the game when it's needed, and then shithouse your way to a win when it's needed. So I feel like those teams and the way they've started this season and have continued, I have a good strong feeling that these two teams, we'll see them in the maybe quarterfinals, semifinals, maybe even the finals. Inter Milan, of course, from last year. So of course, those were only two teams that I was going to mention. And now, of course, to toss to Mac, who's going to talk about Arsenal potentially winning the Champions League. Got to give it to you, though. Arsenal do have one of the strongest 11s from the remaining teams. So, Mac, please end it off with your favorites for the Champions League this year.
So first, thank you. I appreciate that. You teed me up there perfectly, chef's kiss. But to go back to your initial point, in terms of how open it feels, I think that's a great call. Considering the reason why I feel you get that feeling, these are the exact same teams, I would say arguably top three teams that could win the Champions League as were last year if you started at the beginning of the tournament, right? I think the difference is you feel like a little bit of shine has been rubbed off on those teams. Man City hasn't been as good this year in the Premier League. Girona is top of this of La Liga right now, so Real Madrid don't look like they're kind of flying high. Bayern Munich, because of how poorly they finished last season, even though they did manage to be able to hang on to the Bundesliga, but you still feel like they haven't really done it before with this core group of players, even though Harry Kane has come in and looked phenomenal. So it just feels like they haven't separated themselves into that kind of, let's say, previous year's favorite levels of echelon, but I still feel like they're at the top tier. Those are the three favorites. In terms of dark horses, I think you called out two. I think the correct way to be able to put them is they are cup competition teams where they have that shithousery. They are comfortable in a 1-0 game. They don't care. They're not, I would say, a full season game against the highest quality. I understand Inter Milan right now is first in Serie A, but they're not a traditional kind of dominant first place team with the lineup that they possess, but they have enough kind of wherewithal and game intelligence to be able to make it through. Same with Atletico Madrid. So I think those are two shouts, but I think the correct answer to him is if you would give me who the fourth team is to finish, if in that likelihood of the tiers, I don't think they're at that tier because I think that they have a bigger hole. They have more questions asked than those three teams above them. I think it has to be Arsenal because if you look at, again, I would argue if you look at the spine of their team in terms of the two center halves, as well as their center midfielders, that's probably the best in the world or in the top three of the world in competition there. If you're looking at Declan Rice, Odegaard, and as a midfield two in alongside kind of Saliba and Gabriel as like a foursome, and whoever you pile on next on the left-hand side of them, that's as good as you're going to get in world of football right now. I think they have two explosive wingers, of course, we talked about, but their whole is kind of the goals. And I think that might be a little bit of the separator between some of these other teams where you look at kind of Inter Milan, Martinez can bag in a couple of goals. You look at Atletico Madrid, they're able to grind out just kind of through the wherewithal and the togetherness of what they're able to do versus Arsenal don't have that same mythology, I think, to kind of will their way through some of these tighter games. But in terms of talent, on the pitch, I think they have to be in that tier, and I would argue closer to the top of that next year after the three favorites. But again, I think the question would be is if you were to pick between those three teams and the rest of the field of anyone else potentially win the Champions League, I'd still take those three teams. It's going to be one of those three teams. I think it's pretty clear. The other teams might have fun, but it'll be one of those three teams once again for me.
Okay, well, that pretty much wraps up this part of our first part of our podcast. We're going to take a quick break here, guys, and then we'll be back covering more Champions League action and also some Premier League games coming up. So stay with us, guys. Welcome back to House of Footy, guys. We are going to continue our podcast now, just retracking back to Champions League to sort of close onto our next segment, which is, of course, Man U 0, Bayern Munich 1. Man U unable to get the win against Bayern Munich, meaning they finally finished bottom of Group A. But it was against a quite strong Bayern Munich team who are now 40 games consecutively group stage games in the Champions League without a loss. And so strong team against Man U. They didn't really need the win, but they still, showed respect and put out a strong team. In the game, it didn't look like either team was really had a handle on the game. Both teams were sort of content conceding shots from outside the box, but it felt like, of course, Man U needed the win, and they didn't ultimately have enough to create and get the win. So, Gio, good news is you did get what you wanted. Man U are now out of Europe, but overall, what are your thoughts on this game?
I don't know what Ten Hag was on, but that post game interview that we didn't deserve to. Yeah, you did. Yeah, you did. You guys were not good enough. You guys weren't clinical enough. You guys, in terms of chances created, you guys weren't up to par. Um, Bayern was literally just almost took it as a training match. When one of those preseason training matches, they were really just easing their way into the game. At times it looked like it could have been close, but I think it was just Bayern players just kind of warming up to the game, getting into a rhythm of things. Yeah, no, it wasn't like if anybody said it was close. I don't think it was close. I think Bayern, through and through, were the more convincing team. At any time when they had the ball, it looked like they were the more likely team to go out there and score. So all in all, especially now you for I never thought I'd say this, but arguably one of your more consistent defenders, in Harry Maguire is now injured, came off injured, and you're still knocked out of the group stages, which I said would happen, and wish to happen. Now it has happened. Now you're gonna lose him for potentially, the weekend matchup, which is against a very good team. So yeah, no, it's a double whammy. So I'm happy they're out. Don't get me wrong, I'm happy they're out, but I'm frustrated that you know it led to another injury, and then now it's like the 25th injury of the season. So injuries keep piling up. They didn't look great. Bayern did, and that's why Bayern is moving on.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, I would have had the exact same words. It's weird to say, but Harry Maguire, one of the most consistent Man U players so far this season, is now going to be out. 13 players look like could be missing for the Liverpool match. I'm just going to read some of them out. Maguire, Luke Shaw, who just came back from injury, may miss as well the game. Tora Malacia, Casemiro, Lisandro Martinez, Christian Eriksen, Mason Mount, Victor Lindelof, Amad Diallo, and of course, Bruno Fernandes is suspended, and Jadon Sancho is no longer sort of training with the team. So it's really between Marcus Rashford and Anthony Martial, who I think also did not feature in the game against Bayern Munich. They should be able to start, but there are some doubts over them as well. So not looking great back in a game, of course. 3-0 loss to Bournemouth, and then now this loss to Bayern Munich. Of course, a good Bayern Munich team, but in a way, a negative way to go out of the Champions League this year. Not a great look to go into Anfield, where Man U, of course, lost heavily last season. What are your takes for this upcoming game, and what's next for Man U, essentially?
If Man U get a point, So I don't know what's the correct way to approach this. What is it if Man U don't? What is success deemed? I think that's what we should start kind of figure out for Manchester United.
Sure.
Is it Man U get a point? That's success. I think that's probably wishing it a little bit too much, pushing a little bit too much. I think if Manchester United don't lose by more than 2 goals, that's a success. I think is that the baseline that we're working with now, and the fact that we're talking about Manchester United in this way, and it feels like we're going backwards, right? A lot of Manchester United fans were talking about with Ten Hag, it was step forwards. We're improving. We're trying to change the philosophy, but now you have a goalkeeper that's better with his feet, but still goes long. It doesn't make sense to me. A lot of this doesn't kind of jive and fit together. There doesn't seem to. Again, I sound like a metronome. I sound like I'm repeating myself. That doesn't seem like a cohesive plan. I think the positive for Manchester United, and I apologize, is kind of selfish for me, is now Manchester United so far this season have lost more games than they've won, which, again, if it stays like that for the rest of the season, it's a fun season for Andrew. But, we'll wait and see for there. I think for Liverpool, like I said, I think if they at least come out and don't get shellacked and have a good couple of moments where they don't look like a bottom of the table team, which they have looked in the Champions League, but they have looked better in the Premier League in some games. I think that is a step forward. Will that happen though? I'm going to go with probably not. I don't think it's a coincidence that a lot of players, if maybe injuries happen, I'm not saying people fake or injuries, whatever that may be, but I don't think it's a coincidence that Bruno Fernandes is like, you know what? I might want to take a yellow right now. You know what? He could have saved it for the Christmas holidays. That's generally what historically Premier League players would have done. But again, he did it here. So again, I think it's just going from bad to worse. I think not dissimilar to Newcastle, who we'll touch on later. I think that with them crashing out of not just Champions League, but out of European football as a whole, I think this puts them in a position where they're going to take a couple weeks. It's going to get a little bit darker before it gets better. It's going to not look so good for the next couple of weeks. Then once they're able to get bodies back, get to reset and figure out who that starting 11 is that can play in, week out, I think then they may start to round the corner. So it's going to look bad now, but because they've been so poor, it's not put them in the position where they can, as a team, as a starting 11, mentally reset and hopefully build a foundation going forward. Will Ten Hag still be there? Will they be given time? Will they make more crazy adjustments and incorrect signings in January? All possible. But there is, again, I think a pathway to hopefully rebuilding something, but we'll see what happens. And this is not the game to do it. And this is a write-off. If you get anything out of this game, like a positive moment. If Garnacho nutmegs Trent twice, great job, Man United. Like something like that. That's a starting point.
I mean, he's not really a good defender, so it's not really hard to do.
I'm trying. Gio, I'm helping. I'm trying to help here. What do you want from me? Fine. Okay. If someone dribbles by Van Dijk, probably won't. No, that's too high. Again, we need to set fair expectations. I don't know what it is. That's the confusing part.
Maybe Højlund opens his Premier League's goal scoring against Liverpool.
Asking for too much. I think that's asking for that's they should do a trophy. They should get a trophy for that.
Hey,
I think
someone has to start taking the pens.
He should get. Do you know the in-season tournament trophy that the NBA players got? Højlund should get one of those if he scores at Anfield and get a round of applause by us in the beginning of our next podcast if that happens.
That's fair. Well, the only thing I gotta say is on Liverpool side, of course, this would be a perfect fixture to go into. A fair weekend Man U team at home. Finally got the first place spot in the table. What a better way to get a convincing win against big rivals. Of course, Man U are still big rivals of Liverpool. So get a big win here, cement that first place spot, and hopefully, continue that run of form. And just lastly, before we move on to another game, to sort of summarize, I think how Man U fans have been feeling and kind of what I would expect Man U fans to be feeling. I came across this tweet and I'm paraphrasing it, is just very disappointed because it feels like Man U's season is essentially done because, in the summer you saw big signings, everyone's hyped up about the Champions League, but now, unfortunately, out of the Champions League and in the league, it's going to be a tough battle to get in top 4. So just summarizing that tweet that I thought perfectly encapsulates how a lot of fans are feeling at the moment. So just moving past that now. Gio, maybe something more fun to talk about. Newcastle taking on Fulham. Newcastle, of course, off the back of a couple losses in the Premier League, Everton and Spurs most recently, and then now losing to AC Milan at home. Host Fulham, who have won their last 2 games against Nottingham Forest and West Ham by 5 goals to 0. Could this be another loss inflicted upon Newcastle in this coming weekend? So, what are your thoughts for this upcoming game, Gio?
To be honest, I think our this hot take or not, I think this is going to be one of Eddie Howe's biggest tests as a manager, and
Mm.
by test I mean how he's going to get the team, how he's going to get to round up the boys, to come out and play this game and play it exceptionally well, knowing their standard, knowing their ceiling, knowing their goals and aspirations. How are they really going to come out and play a good game, a well-rounded game, and to get points out of this game? I think that's the most important part. Coming off, obviously the disappointing thing is being outside of the Champions League. And I think fans are going to still be disappointed by the time this game starts. But Fulham, again, when they get their opportunities, they are able to score. So they can't take this game very lightly either. They're going to have to want to come out and possess the ball and really keep the ball away from Fulham, as again, they love to counter. They have the pace. Paulinho in the middle of the field is a threat. He can get under the skin of, just based on his ability to strip the ball away from you. I think that's going to frustrate a lot of the Newcastle midfielders, particularly a Joe Linton, particularly a Bruno Guimaraes, who we know can pick up a card very quickly. So it's going to be a big test for them. And it's going to be the biggest test that Eddie Howe, as the manager to this date, with all these new signings, with all this anticipation with the club, is going to face. So it's going to be a very interesting game. I think Newcastle should be up for the challenge. But again, this arguably will be one of the games of the weekend.
Just quickly before I toss it to you, Mac, I don't think I got your thoughts on Newcastle being completely out of Europe, Gio. Do you think they benefit from not even having Europa League, or do you think, with the injuries that they have, Newcastle, it's better for them to just regroup and, put all the efforts into the league to hopefully finish as high as possible? What are your thoughts, Gio?
No, absolutely. I think again, like we mentioned last podcast, it'd be shocking if they didn't take advantage of their Saudi partnerships to get them there. Whether they make it out of the group stage or not, yes, it'd be a great feat for them this year. But had injuries not happened and things of that nature not happen, they could have done so. But that's not the case now. What is our next best thing? And I think running the team as a business, you still have to look at the next best thing. The next best thing is to finish as high as possible and to put yourself in the best situation to re-enter the Champions League next year. Because if you don't enter the Champions League, one, you're going to lose out on a bunch of signings. Two, you're not going to get that funding to sign those players. So it's a double-edged sword. So you really got to kind of lock in right now and understand that's in the past now. We can't change that result. The result is the result. We gotta strap in, hopefully get the players back as soon as possible. But if not, January they are looking to sign, and it does seem like they're willing to sign. So yeah, they have to finish as high as possible, at least in the top four, to see themselves back in the Champions League, where they see themselves and want themselves.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so Mac, this upcoming game for Newcastle sounds tricky, considering Fulham's recent record. What are your thoughts for this upcoming game?
It's going to be tough. I think they have to. I think the thought process going into not just this game, their upcoming stretch of games in the Premier League is where they just have to be able to come out with a mentality of survive. They think, if I recall correctly, they face Fulham. Then in the Premier League, they go to Luton, which they should feel fairly comfortable with, in my opinion. If they can survive up until, and then they have Nottingham Forest, and then they get in a little bit of a bad stress stretch where they face Liverpool, Man City, and then Aston Villa consecutively. So they need to survive these next couple of games, come out with some positive results, because in that tear of early January for them, that's as bad of a run as you can face in the Premier League right now. And if they come out of that and they're in the middle of January when those signings are potentially coming in, and let's say over the next 6 games, they pick up, let's say, more than double-digit points, if you're able to combine them all, I think then you're going to be able to start to turn the corner. As down bad, I would say, as we've been on Manchester United, Newcastle is still a point behind them, but there's just different feeling about them because you trust their manager, you trust their players, you trust their template, you trust that they can be able to bring in more players in January. I think you have to give them a lot of goodwill right now, and hopefully by the end of the season they'll be in that conversation. They will be in that conversation for that 4th spot. And I think if you're asking me right now which team would finish, it's between them and Spurs. Flip a coin. I think Aston Villa and Manchester United may fall off in that conversation. But to go back into this Villa game, like I said, it's just survive. If they come out and at least be able to manage a tie, considering kind of how tired of legs that they have at the moment, I think that's a huge result for them. And I think they're fully capable of doing that. I think the Fulham team, when they played these games, these last couple of rounds, because those teams, they're very comfortable without the ball as well, which is surprising to a lot of other teams that are also not comfortable with the ball as well. And that's why you look at a result like West Ham, where neither team, if you ask the manager, okay, we don't want the ball, but who ends up having more possession generally is going to more likely make that mistake to cost them, and it's going to compound from there. I feel like Newcastle are a much better team like that. They have enough technical ability where they're going to be comfortable. They're not going to allow as much gaps that this Fulham team has seen in these last couple rounds of games. So I think they should do enough to see themselves through. But I do agree with both of you. This is a very tough fixture, and if they come out with a draw, that's a good stepping stone going into 2 games back-to-back that they should win going forward.
Yeah, so it's just hanging on until the next couple games to hopefully get some more players back. So we'll see what happens there. And let's just finally preview one last game, which is actually Arsenal versus Brighton. A game where Arsenal, of course, lost to Aston Villa in the league last week. Brighton tied Burnley. Brighton haven't been as consistent over the last couple of weeks, even though they had quite a hot start to the season. Max, is this the perfect chance for Arsenal to get a win and keep pressure on Liverpool at the top of the table?
Absolutely. This I think this is a game, I think is right now, if you look at kind of the style that Arsenal want to play, the perfect opposition that you want to play against them. It's high risk, but potentially very, very high reward how this Brighton team plays. If you're able to corral, if you're able to kind of massage, if you're able to be able to deal with the attacking threat that Brighton possess, which I think Arsenal, if you ask them, and based off their record thus far this season in the Premier League, have one of the stiflest defenses in the league. They should do enough there. And this Brighton team are going to give you enough holes at the back where players like Jesus, Saka, Martinelli should potentially be able to run riot. If you have a situation, as an example, I know I don't mean to do him dirty, but if you have Martinelli versus James Milner, I'm sorry, brother, you're cooked. It's not your game. This is not how it's done. I'm sorry. I'm slow too. It happens to us, or whoever's playing center half of Brighton. It's not a good day. It's just, this is not the game week for Brighton. And I don't think it's too dissimilar to kind of what we saw with Chelsea. I'm not comparing Arsenal to Chelsea, but Chelsea needed an abundance of chances to pull out a win against Brighton. And because Brighton opened themselves up to be able to create that, I think Arsenal, similarly, if they're given those chances, then we're going to look to see kind of the free-flowing attack Arsenal that we saw for quite a bit of last year. And I think this is a game that they can kind of dip back into that and start to express themselves a little bit more, because they need to do that going in the stretch run, because you can't win every game 1-0, 2-1. This is not Chelsea under Jose Mourinho with Drogba going to get that goal for you and Petr Cech with a clean sheet. It's not those days anymore. You need to be able to put the ball in the back of the net. And this is an opportunity for Arsenal to face tough competition, but the competition that is going to, at the same time, give them the opportunity to be able to do that. So I think this is a great time for Arsenal to play this team. And I know I went very, very Arsenal heavy on that. I apologize. It just is what it is. I think, though, on the other side, to quickly bring up to a point, how Brighton can expose Arsenal is in those transitional moments, because Arsenal have a tendency not to be clinical with the ball. and not to be able to clinical with the chances, not to be able to put the ball in the back of net. That's been the area of concern. Those transitional moments, especially if Zinchenko's playing and he's out of position out wide, is where you can expose this Arsenal team and get it behind. If Matoma has a great game, if either of the wingers have a great game for Brighton, I think that's where you're going to see the joy. If that's where you're going to see the expression, where they may be able to then isolate Saliba and Gabriel one-on-one and get behind a sometimes shaky David Raya thus far this season. So again, I think Brighton still have a chance, but I strongly favor Arsenal into this game.
Okay, well, similar question to Gio. Of course, Brighton, Gio are in the Europa League and have been sort of had their squad stretched thin with those commitments in the Europa League. Currently sit in second and face Marseille, time of recording tomorrow, to determine who will finish first in that group. Do you think it's just so many games that they're playing that their form in the league has been inconsistent? Do you think they have a chance against Arsenal? What do you think their approach should be? What are your thoughts, Gio?
Yeah, I think extra games always contributes to fatigue and lack of focus. I think yes, they are great, and under De Zerbi, they have done great things. But that's the proof is in the pudding. You see tired legs. You see the lack of depth that they had. You start seeing the reliance on some of your key guys, like the Matomas, like the Fergusons. If they don't create, who's gonna create? If they don't put away their chances, who else is gonna put away their chances? How often are you gonna get a Denny Welbeck goal? So obviously raises those questions, right? So, do they have a chance? Absolutely. I don't think Arsenal should sleep on them by any means of the word. They are able to convert, and they have proven themselves last year, and they, although not as consistent, have also proven themselves this year that they are able to put away goals when given the opportunity. I'm not saying Manchester United is Arsenal level; they are far from it. But we've seen what Evan Ferguson has done to them. We've seen that offensive counterattack work and work very well at that. So Arsenal have to be very careful in terms of, yes, if the game is tied, if the game is close, on how they attack, because the counterattack is lurking and is very efficient.
Yeah, of course. And to add to that point, Brighton actually won at the Emirates last season, that fixture. So something to keep in mind, will be in the back of Arteta's mind. So yeah, a game we'll keep an eye out for, because of course it will dictate how the league table finishes at the end of the weekend. But this concludes our podcast for today, guys. If you guys like what you heard, please like and subscribe to us on our social medias. That's at @houseof_footy. If you have any comments, suggestions, or general banter, get in touch with us via email as well, houseoffooty@hotmail.com. The next time you hear from us will be on Tuesday when we review this weekend's Premier League games. But until then, thank you for joining us tonight, Mac.
So,
Thank you, Gio.
The boys are out, baby.
See you guys soon.